Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Super Coach Mates. Well, tonight is the night. The finals officially kick off tonight with Port Adelaide versus Geelong. So, good luck to all 8 teams in the finals. So, on Monday's episode, we looked at the two qualifying finals. And tonight, we are going to have a look at the two elimination finals. So tonight I am joined once again as normal by Thomas. How are you, Thomas?
Yeah, not too bad. Looking forward to tonight's final and also tomorrow's final. I've actually got, I haven't told you this yet, but I've actually managed to snag tickets for the elimination final. So I don't know. I'll just tell the audience
They're
how
a
you
hot
have to.
commodity.
So it really depends how much you want them, essentially. But I've been pretty keen to go to this bloody elimination final. So if you go to the North Melbourne Footy Club Hospitality
I
website,
did see this.
yeah, so this is depending on if you want to pay up, but from I did the maths, and it's essentially you pay 20% more, so it's not too bad. You're guaranteed confirmed week one of finals, which is obviously Dogs versus Hawthorn. I think this is really because there's only one game in Melbourne per finals is the reason they're doing it, to kind of capitalise. The cost is $200 tickets, $200 for the set. So essentially, you guaranteed Dogs versus Hawks tickets, which obviously are a hot commodity, as Nath said. You then guaranteed either week 2 finals or week 3 finals, depending if the Cats win or lose. So personally, I'm hoping the Cats win, so I get a guaranteed week 3 finals tickets, which are limited anyway. But yeah, if you're keen to get finals tickets, I think the North Hospitality crew have blocked out a whole. I spoke to on the phone this morning, so essentially all the seats are around the Shane Warne stand level 4. It's actually a pretty good view off that stand for level 4 ticket holders. So it seems like the tickets are in that area. If you do want to buy tickets for that Friday night game, if you do want to go with a mate, buy them together, buy the two finals passes together. That will allow you to sit next to each other. Otherwise, you run the risk of not sitting next to each other, which is obviously a little bit frustrating. But yeah, essentially, I don't obviously, the other finals could be sold out, but the Dogs Hawthorn was officially declared sold out. I don't see many tickets becoming available. If you want to snag a ticket and have half a decent seat, you're not completely up the back in the nosebleeds, that's probably the way to go. As I said, they're essentially $100 finals tickets per ticket, which you look at it's obviously a little bit pricey, but if you are wanting to go, that's probably the easiest way there, because I've seen even third-party sites that do resales are not even selling them. So, yeah, we obviously are going through the two elimination finals, if you haven't noticed already. These are two huge finals. The Dogs Hawks one's been talked about for essentially a fortnight for being the game of the round, and also the Carlton Brisbane one is unique in its own right, considering half the team's coming back, and one particular player we'll talk about later for Blues who could make a miraculous comeback come Saturday night. But the last time these two teams met, the Hawks actually beat. That's not meant to say Hawks defeated the Hawks. That's meant to say Hawks defeated the Dogs, 98-91. So Hawks got over the Dogs by 7 points in a really close encounter. I believe it was round 8. Having said that, the Dogs have definitely found form. This was back when Beveridge was looking likely to get sacked, and everyone wanted his head. But the Dogs have turned it around. Beveridge has turned it around. They've turned Rory Lobb into the next All-Australian fullback. But this is a game of really two tales, where you've got the Dogs who have done it before on the final stage, where they've come from the clouds to make the grand final and win it. Hawthorn are the flavour of the month, really, for footy fans alike. They're everyone's bandwagoner. My question to you, Nathan, is: do you reckon the Hawks win this one, or do you reckon this kind of Hawks romance falls apart in finals, where they're smashing up on teams come late in the season, where there's already players being rested and whatnot? But do you think they are really up to the task against a fierce Dogs outfit?
Yeah, well, all the numbers on this game say the Bulldogs should be winning this game comfortably. Like, really, really, I'm talking really comfortably. I think this is statistically the most one-sided final of all of them, which is probably surprising given the form of Hawthorn. But the Dogs are that far ahead in every stat but one. And the one stat they're behind in is by 0.3 of a point. So essentially it's points from turnover. Otherwise, the Bulldogs have Hawthorn covered in every single stat. In saying that, though, it's hard to ignore the form of Hawthorn, given that since I think round 6, they're the number one form team in the competition. Their last 3 games at the MCG, they've won by they've won by an average of 10 goals.
Yeah.
And historically, small forwards do all the damage in finals. The key forwards sort of don't do as much damage. So if you have a look at these forward lines, the Hawthorn forward line's got Ginnivan and the Wizard Watson and Bruce and McDonald, who are all smaller forwards. And the Bulldogs forwards are Norton and Darcy and Jamara, who are all taller. So historically, as I said, key forwards don't really do well in finals. So I think that's Hawthorn's best chance is if they can turn this game into a scrap and keep the ball sort of low. I think they can get over the top of the Bulldogs. In saying that, though, it is hard to ignore the form of the Bulldogs. I'll get into that when we go through the Bulldogs players. But basically, I think unfortunately for Hawthorn, I think this is probably the one team they didn't want to run into in the first week of the finals.
Yeah.
Because I think I would tip them at the MCG in just about against any other team, given the form that they're in. But the Bulldogs are just that far ahead at the minute that it was quite ridiculous actually doing the profiles just to see how far ahead the Dogs were of everyone else.
Yeah.
I think the Bulldogs can go all the way from 6th place or whatever they're in. I think they can go all the way and win the premiership. So I'm not quite sure if Hawthorn are ready for that yet. I think the Dogs can do it. So based on that, I think the Dogs, unfortunately, even though I would love to see Hawthorn perhaps keep the fairy tale going, I think they've just run into the one side who I don't think they wanted to run into. So for this game, I will be going the Dogs. But again, Hawthorn's form is hard to ignore.
Yeah, no, 100% right. I think Hawthorn's not necessarily the last month of footy, but this finals game in particular almost feels reminiscent of when St Kilda played GWS last year, where St Kilda made the finals off a whim, and really the Giants were the last team you wanted to come up against at the time. Having said that, we know it's a Dogs home game, but you look at Hawthorn's home ground as the G. The Hawks fans are going to be pumping. They're going to be excited. They're going to be willing their team across the line, considering it was an unexpected finals berth. And I think if the Hawks have any chance, they really got to stop the Dogs' roll early, kick a lot of goals in that first quarter and really start pumping, and then hope for the best that the Dogs don't find their form later in the game. I think that's the way the game potentially might run. But moving on to the key plays for the Dogs, obviously 3 players in 3 different lines. Starting off with Bontempelli, I think he's probably going to have a good game anyway, but I reckon the Hawks are going to find any which way possible to stop him. Whether they do stop him or not is another question. I think Bont is one of those players, and we'll talk about Paddy Cripps later. I think he's the one player that can will his team over the line, regardless of how well the Dogs are doing overall. Bailey Dale's an interesting one. Was in the All-Australian squad, didn't get selected, but probably showed how impressive a season he's had off half-back. You know, earlier in the season, he wasn't even the best 22, so it's been a massive turnaround by his standard as half the Dog squad itself, 25 disposal average. He's got a lethal weapon of a foot. I think he's very underrated kicking that ball inside 50. Through D50 in the midfield. He just executes it to perfection. I think he's a big reason why the Dogs have bounced back. And Tim English is a big one, which would be interesting to see your thoughts, Nathan, from a statistical standpoint as well, if you've got that on dial. But English is one that was very disappointing as a Supercoach owner. I think I mentioned it in a Saints TV podcast I was on. But he's been a frustrating player where he's one like Rowan Marshall, where the new rule got introduced where, you know, the bigger ruckmans can kind of fend the more agile ruckmans off with the stiff arm, and they can't jump through them. They've got to work around them. Marshall seemed to do that with his clearance work. English just looked totally lost. in all honesty. He just didn't know where to go. He didn't know how to jump over those bigger ruckmen. Granted, he probably plays a pit nail to Conning in the ruck, which probably helps a little bit, but 8.1 hit outs to advantage. You look at, not Pitney, DeConning, Lloyd Meek. What am I talking about? So he could struggle big time against Lloyd Meek. Lloyd Meek's averaging about 10 plus hit outs to advantage. So if Meek can kind of fend English away, the Dogs are going to have to find a workaround in that through the midfield brigade to get on top of it, because Meek's, and we'll talk about making the Hawthorn players, he's a big, big reason why the Hawks midfield are the way they are. I think he's been one of the best recruits for them, bar Ginnivan and whatnot with their forward line. English needs to really burn Meek the other way. So not necessarily winning hit outs, but dominating around the ground. What are your thoughts, Nathan? And is there any players that maybe in the forward line in particular for the Dogs that need to stand up to really put the Hawks at bay?
Yeah, well, I think Riley West holds the key for this game, to be honest with you. I think if he comes back in, it just strengthens that small forward line down at the Bulldogs. But yes, I do agree that all three of them, I think, need to have good games for the Dogs to win. I think with Tim English, I think he has been hurt by that change in the rule where the ruckman can now just basically put their arm out, the max scoring rule, and basically just hold them at bay. He's not the strongest person, but what he does really well is he gets around the ground really well. So I think that's why perhaps his raw impact, which is what Supercoach is based off, has dropped away this year. Let's just hope that it was a one out year and not a trend, because I think he will be somewhat popular at the start of next year, depending on how the Dogs go here. But I will just quickly go through. So the Dogs, so their turnover game is ranked 4th in the AFL. So as I said, it doesn't fit the top 3 criteria. But there was 1 year in there where I think the side did come from, I think it was 5th and won that premiership without being in the top 3 turnover games. So obviously it can be done. But last 6 weeks, so they have the best profile of any team over the last 6 weeks, the Western Bulldogs. They've got the 3rd best profile with the football. They've got the best profile without the football, which might surprise some people, given that defensively they were very leaky early on. But the last 6 weeks, they're number 1. Number 2 at scores from clearance differential, and they're the best team at winning contest around the ground. So they are not below 3 in any of the stats. And as I said, 10 of the last 11 premiers have ranked top 6 in at least 3 of the 4. And right now they are top 3 in all 4 of them. So you could not be better placed as the Western Bulldogs going into this final series. The only issue is that they're going to have to come from 6 to win the premiership. So I think their best bet is, I think they will sit back on Thursday night and hope that Geelong lose, and then they stay in Melbourne for that semi-final. Because I think back-to-back interstate trips might be a too big an ask. Although in saying that, the Giants did that last year against Port Adelaide, and then they started off down here in Melbourne against St Kilda, and then they went to Adelaide. So it can be done, but I think for the Dogs to win it, they've got to hope that Geelong lose that the game tonight. Otherwise, they're no chance of I don't think they can come from 6 with having to travel twice in a row and then come back against a side who potentially might be, fresh off from last week. It could even be Port Adelaide that they make in the grand final, the Dogs. So you'd think that that's going to be the Dogs' best chance is Geelong lose tonight. They stay in they stay in Melbourne, and then they've only got to do the travel once. But as I said, the Dogs, I think, can win the premiership, but I think the only factor that's going to stop them is that travel.
Yeah, no, 100%. You're right there. But moving on to the Hawks, there, the obviously the in-season team of the competition, the year, whatever you want to say. Sam Mitchell probably gets Coach of the Year, but three
Yeah, fairy
players.
tale story.
Yeah, exactly. Three players that I've picked that are going to be super, super important across the lines. John Newcomb, he's probably the key, not to stop Bontempelli, but to essentially break even in contested ball for the Hawks. 6 clearances per game. He stepped up big time since Will Day has not been in there. Will Day's obviously not playing with that collarbone issue. Newcomb's going to be a crux to actually win the footy because the Dogs have got the likes of Trelaw. Ed Richards is huge. Bontempelli's big time. You know, he's the one key player for the Hawks that can kind of break even the other way. Meek, as I spoke about briefly with regards to Team English, I think he's super important to try and nullify English. He's a massive, massive unit. Watching him live, 10.6 hit outs to advantage. You know, I owned him in Supercoach, and you wondered how he got to 100 with his lack of disposals. He doesn't win it around the ground. He wins it at stoppage. Hence why the Hawks are just getting first-hand to clearances so often. And given your old mate Nathan, who used to play for the Pies, 17 disposals as small forwards, actually pretty impressive. I didn't realise that. That's in the elite category for small forwards. He's changed, obviously, the way they played that forward half footy. He's created that party atmosphere, which I think's allowed, you know, fans alike to fall in love with the Hawks and how well they've been going. Goal celebrations and whatnot, making them, you know, that fun, sexy team to watch. Is there any other players I missed out on, and how do they look? Obviously, we've talked about them falling well behind in statistical categories. Is there any stats on your page there that, you know, they could essentially try and get over the top in the Dogs in?
To put it bluntly, no. The Dogs are ahead in all of the key stats that I mentioned in our qualifying final video. The only stat that Hawthorn is ahead of in the Bulldogs is that they've given up, on average, they've given up zero point 0.3 less points on average from turnover. And that's
Yeah.
it. All of the other stats, there's a bit of a discrepancy between the two. Like the Dogs are a point more on average from turnover. I know a point doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. It is basically 4th and 8th across the season, which is quite significant. Inside 50s, they're 3 less inside 50s, they're 3 less clearances, they're 6 less contested possession. So the Hawks are going to have it up against them to win the game purely based off this, but we know that the stats don't always tell the full story. They give a good guide, but they don't always tell the full story. You just have to look back to last year's grand final when Brisbane were the form side entering it. All the numbers said Brisbane, and then Collingwood performed better on the day, and that's why they won the premiership. So I think all 3 of these players are vitally important for Hawthorn. The one I'd be interested as well to have a bit of a nibble in there is James Sicily. I don't know what role he plays on Friday night or tomorrow night. But it will be interesting to see who he goes to from that Bulldogs forward line. Does he go to Jamara? Does he go to Norton? Does he go to Darcy? Does he go to one of the smaller players? So I think that's going to be perhaps a pivotal matchup, is what Hawthorn and Sam Mitchell do with Sicily. And the other one, as I mentioned briefly earlier on, is the small forwards. If Hawthorn are to win this game, their small forwards have to hit the scoreboard. If they get nullified, then the Hawks cannot win this game. So all of those small forwards, so McDonald, the Wizard Watson, Bruce, Ginnivan, McDonald, all of those players are going to be vital for Hawthorn's chances in this game. The one thing I will point out as well is I think Hawthorn this year have scored the most goals from direct free kicks. Now, historically, free kicks in finals do slightly drop away as well. They don't tend to get paid. There seems to be a different standard between a finals free kick and a home and away free kick. So I don't know if that's going to hurt Hawthorn in that regard, because perhaps some of the free kicks that they might have been banking on during the home and away season might get overlooked, or perhaps even go the other way. So there's going to be that factor as well. Just really quickly, so Hawthorn sit fifth in the turnover game, so they're just behind the Dogs. Last 6 weeks, they've got the fourth best profile, number 5 with the football, number 8 without the football. Hang on, so number 8 without the football, which is a little bit concerning. It means they're not holding up well defensively. Scores from clearance, they're 8th as well. Again, as I touched on in the qualifying final video, it doesn't really, I guess, matter if you win this stat completely in finals, but it's more basically about breaking even. And then their post clearance game is number 2. So the Dogs are number 1 at post clearance, and Hawthorn are number 2. So there's no doubt that this game is going to be probably won in the contest around the ground. So in saying all of that, because this game has the 2 best contest game sides around the ground, then perhaps the scores from clearance differential might come into play more than perhaps what it should for other finals.
Yeah.
In saying that, and they've won 3 of their last 4 as well. So in saying all of that, I still think the Dogs should be confident with this game. And I think for Hawthorn, unfortunately, they've just run into the wrong team in the first week of the finals.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely been an intriguing contest, because I said if the Hawks do get on a roll early, that's where we'll see really where the Dogs' grit is at, and if they can rubber stamp their chances and move on to greater and better things. I think the Bulldogs are, I reckon, outright favourites here, as much as there's a home ground advantage, even though it's an away game for the Hawks and whatnot. But yeah, moving forward, I think the Dogs can really do some damage in the final series if they get their A-grade game going, moving quickly. Early days. But moving on to the final elimination final, or the first elimination final, if you want to be pen and paper stuff. So yeah, Lions versus Blues, big game in the Gabba. This has got huge ramifications, I think, post whatever happens, either team. You look at the Blues, they lose this one. Do you see it as a really brave attempt to make finals, given the injuries they had all over the back end of the season? Are the Lions really at the crossroads if they lose this one and they're out? And there's been how many chances they've had to win the premiership and they've just blown it. The last time these two met was in round 0 this year, and the Blues got over by 1 point. So the Blues probably come into this full of confidence, knowing that they've got their best players back in the park. The Lions are known to blow games late in particular. And, with the likes of Kerner and Mackay back, the way they've been playing, they lost to, obviously, our boys by 2 points and blew a few games along the way. But if they can get their best team on the park, Carlton and Sam Doherty actually might get a miraculous return to this game, which would be definitely interesting, considering the last 2 games he actually played the Gabba, and that's been it. But what are your thoughts, Nathan, on this final elimination final? Will we see a Blues fairy tale? Do you think the Lions are just too strong?
I'll just be very, very blunt here. Carlton fans, prepare for next year. I'm just going to be very, very blunt. There's only one avenue that I can see Carlton possibly winning this game, and that is to make this a shootout. The one side you don't want to do a shootout against is the Brisbane Lions. The one venue you don't want to do a shootout against the Brisbane Lions at is the Gabba. So I don't think Carlton can win this game. In fact, I think this is probably the most one-sided game out of all of them. I know the Dogs' statistical profile was miles ahead of what Hawthorn's was. But in terms of where these two sides are right now, there is a significant gap. In fact, this is actually the widest gap between any of the 8 sides this week. So where they sit in terms of how they've gone recently, as well as their sort of the stats that matter. the only way Carlton can win this game is they have scored more points on average from clearance and turnover, as well as turnover against than what Brisbane have. But a lot of that was probably when they had players. And Brisbane have the best defensive profile at defending turnovers this year. So I just think this game's made for Brisbane. They're in much better form. And there's still a lot of question marks about Carlton, who's going to come back for them. But I don't think that's going to matter. I just cannot see Carlton going up there and beating the Brisbane Lions. Yes, they did it earlier in the year. But as we saw with Collingwood, in 2 nights later, that perhaps the shorter preseason did play a factor in that. And you've also got to factor in as well the fact that I think Brisbane were up by 40 odd points in this game as well. They lost Kadeem Coleman to an ACL and it basically stifled their entire run off the back line for the rest of that game. And it got Carlton right back into that game. So I think there were factors in that game that helped Carlton ultimately get across the line. I just cannot see those same things happening again. So Brisbane by the length of the mile. I think Brisbane could win this game by 6 or 7 goals.
Yeah. I think you nailed on the head there with the rounds here. You just got to look closer as what happened. And Brisbane, as you said, lost Kitty Common, and they've sorted that out with Zorko down halfback, and they've sorted it out with Darcy Wilmot coming through the ranks with their halfback run and dash. And I think, it's the toughest gig going around at the moment. SCG is one challenge, but the Gabba when the Lions are firing is another one. I do not think the Lions will want to slip this up, considering that it'd be frustrated they didn't get the home final and they want to make the most of this elimination final. But moving on to the key players for the Lions. Now, obviously, the glaringly obvious omission is Lachie Neale. I don't think he's a key player to some degree, but I think he's going to have a good game regardless. That's how good he is. But Josh Dunkley, I think he's the kryptonite to Cripps in the fact that I think he can nullify him quite well. 6.2 tackles in the elite category there on average. He just has the innate ability when it comes to tough midfield matchups. He's the one that shines out of the midfield bunch for the Lions. Harris Andrews, I think, will go probably to Curnow is my bet. 7.4 spoils elite as well. He's just been Mr. Fix-It down back for them. Maybe not Mr. Fix-It, but Mr. Dependable down there. Was, a controversial omission from the All-Australian team. Wiedering got the nod over him. I think he's got a point to prove now, showing who's boss down back. And Joe Danaher, I was going to put Eric Hipwood there, but I think Danaher is the one that if he can kick the goals, he can get the party started for them. He can get those contested marks over Wiedering. I think the Lions win comfortably. I don't think, even though he has a quiet game, I think they still win. But I think if Danaher is completely shut out by Wiedering and Wiedering dominates him, if he does, then Carlton go a long way to winning that game. But Danaher's one that if he gets the crowd up and about, they're really unstoppable. He's the one that's almost like that barometer per se. If he doesn't do well, the Lions really don't do well. If he kicks 3 goals and a half or 3 goals and a quarter, they're on and they're firing. But what are your thoughts, Nate, on the Lions' profile? And is there anyone else we're missing out on?
Yeah, well, the most important thing for Carlton is they don't want to let Country Roads play early at the Gabba. If that goes off really early, look out. It could be a massacre this game. I think does so much with getting that Brisbane Lions crowd involved with because they all love Country Roads now. They know all the words to the song. They even sing it after the stadium has stopped playing it, and they're halfway through the next play and they're still singing it. So that has to be a massive motivator for Brisbane when they hear that Country Road song go around the PA system. I know Collingwood talk about how their crowd helped them get over the line in basically a lot of their games last year. That has to have the same impact on the Brisbane Lions players. So For Carlton, they cannot let that go off early, otherwise it's going to be a massacre. I'll just refer back to the qualifying final last year, when Brisbane played Port Adelaide. I think Cameron got 2 really early goals, and basically the game was over after that. Or he got 2 goals. When when sort of Brisbane was starting to get on top, he got the 2 goals very quickly, Cameron, and Brisbane ran away with the game. And even the grand final last year, they played Country Roads a quarter time, and Brisbane came out in the second quarter, and I think they kicked the first 2 goals, and I think Cameron had an involvement in both of them. So that has to get up hearing that song. In saying all of that, yes, Dunkley is the kryptonite for Patrick Cripps. I think that's just a straight given. I think Dunkley will go to Cripps, and that's just walk in the bed. Andrews, I think, will go to one of Mackay or Kerno if Kerno plays. I think Mackay is more likely. And Joe Danaher, well, I think if he gets the matchup on Wiedering, which I would suspect is going to happen, that'll be an interesting duel. Obviously, Wiedering All Australian this year, whether you agree with it or not, he probably deserved to be there. But then I think Harris Andrews deserved to be there as well. I think it just came down to, who perhaps deserved it more from a personal perspective or whatnot. But just quickly, so Brisbane have the number 1 turnover game in the AFL. So as I said, 18 of the last 19 premiers are ranked top 3 in the turnover game. They are number 1. Last 6 weeks, they have the second best profile of any team in the AFL. So they're number 2 with the ball, number 6 without the ball, number 5 at scores from clearance, and number 4 at winning contests around the ground. So like the Western Bulldogs, they rank top 6 in all 4 of these key statistical measures. Unlike the Bulldogs, however, they are going to have to win 3 finals on the road to win the grand final, and I just cannot see that happening because their kryptonite is going to be on grand final day, and that is the MCG. I don't know what happens to them, but they get to the MCG and they just freak out. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the atmosphere. I don't know if it's the conditions, but there is definitely something going on there. When I think Brisbane have only won 6 of their last 25 games there. There is definitely something amiss about Brisbane and the way they play the MCG. So I don't think they can win the grand final. I would love for them to prove me wrong, because I think if there's any team and any coach that deserves it, it is this team, given how consistent they've been over the last sort of 5 or 6 years. But unfortunately, I think it's just going to be a step too far to ask them to travel 3 times and win. So I think the question marks will remain about Brisbane and whether or not Fagan's the right coach for them, and whether or not they're perhaps coming towards the end of their premiership window. But I will say now that in some ways, I do feel like Collingwood got some revenge for the 2 premierships in 2002 and 2003. They obviously beat Brisbane in last year's grand final, and then coming back and winning by the point, I think has ruined any chance of Brisbane going and winning a premiership this year. I know you can never, ever take back a grand final result, but if that is any small consolation, I will take that. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the Brisbane Lions.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right in saying their kryptonite is playing anywhere away from the Gabba, really. And
not at Marvel. They do really well at Marvel, not the MCG.
Marvel, I think the half the reason is it's just very similar way of playing footy compared to the Gabba. But if you zoned out that last 10 minutes, if you want to sum that up, the more Country Road gets played come Saturday night, the better the Lions are doing. So yeah.
Yes.
If you're not sure how the Lions are going, just see how many times they play that bloody song on speed dial. But moving on to the Blues. So, the Blues were that close away from missing out on finals, and then Freo didn't do their due diligence for the rest of Australia. And then the Blues went back in the finals, and they have a real chance to cause some damage against the Lions, as we said at the start of the review. But I think it might be a step too far at the Gabba. But 3 players that can make a difference to that. One being Paddy Cripps, superb captain this season. I think he's been the reason why the Blues have had any sniff at this final stuff. Is he's carried them on their back when they've needed him the most. He's carried all the other shit players that the Blues have had. And he's just showed why he's one of the best going around. 8.1 clearances is nutty considering how banged up his body gets as the season goes on. And then I think the last two is there's no introduction needed. The Twin Towers in Kerno and Mackay, they were, sorely missed. Well, maybe not sorely missed per se, because they did change their forward line structure and did quite well actually. But I think they need to come in, have a point to prove. Kerno would have been probably the gold medalist if it wasn't for those injuries in those quiet last few games. But Mackay and Kerno, they need to show the AFL. They need to show Brisbane who's boss. If, Harris, Andrew and co get on top of them, it's game over for the Blues quite quickly. I think it was only, when they were fit before their injuries, at times they just looked lost together. I don't know what it was. But realistically, the Lions only have one really good defender in Andrews. I think the other one gets exposed big time against, say, Mackay, who goes a lot higher up the ground. If Mackay gets off the chain, Kerno gets off the chain, that's when the Blues are at their most dangerous. What are your thoughts, Nathan? Is there a way of stopping these two Twin Towers, or do you think there's any other players for the Blues that need to step up big time for them to have any sort of sniff at it?
Yeah, well, they need their small forwards basically to come to the party, because as I've touched on a few times now, historically, key forwards don't do well in final series. They just don't. You just have to look back to last year's grand final when, outside of Joe Danaher, basically no other key forward did that well. So it is going to be the smalls who ultimately win this game. I still think Mackay and Kerno may kick a goal, but I wouldn't be expecting them to have a massive impact just given that history. But I think Carlton's biggest issue is going to be Paddy Cripps, and the fact that I think Dunkley is just going to sit on him for the whole game. And Walsh has been out of form. And there's been a few other players who just haven't hit the same heights as what they did at this time last year. So I think this is going to be a step too far for Carlton to go up and win at the Gabba. But in saying that, one of the surprising things when I went through this was Carlton actually have the second best turnover profile in the AFL. So Brisbane are number 1, Carlton are number 2. Which that might surprise a few people, given where Carlton sit on the ladder, and the fact that I think they've given up the most points of any side in the top 8. But the overwhelming majority of their points came from stoppage, especially earlier on in the season. I think they're bottom 2 at conceding points from stoppage. So that's Carlton's kryptonite. It's not necessarily the turnover game. In saying that, though, they are playing the best turnover side in the Brisbane Lions at their home ground. So that's another reason why I think it's going to be a step too far. So just quickly touching on Carlton. So Carlton, over the last 6 weeks, number 9 out of the 18 sides. So that's the worst of the 8 finalists. They ranked number 5 with the football, which is why I said I think Carlton's only hope is to make this a shootout. And that's because they're number 12 defensively, they're number 12 at scores from clearance, and they're number 7 at post clearance. So they don't have Brisbane covered in any stat at all. And their one wood is their ability to basically have the football in hand and do damage with it. But outside of that, Brisbane are that far ahead of Carlton that, as I said, I wouldn't be surprised if it was, at least a 6 or 7 goal margin in favour of the Brisbane Lions. But I guess time will tell with that on Saturday night, in a couple of nights, what happens there. But I think out of all the 4 finals, I think this is the one that I hold the gravest concern of being a bit of a blower and a bit of a fizzler, just because of the way that Carlton entered going into this final series, and the fact that they're probably playing the best side at their home ground in the league. That I just think it's going to be a step too far.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think you're spot on there with the kind of turnover game and the struggles the Blues have and how good Brisbane are on turnover. I think the Blues, we just have to look at the Saints game. The way they got back into it was that gung-ho kind of footy straight down the corridor, no stuffing around the wings. But if they don't pull it off effectively, and I guess Kerno and Mackay are huge ins for them, with regards to that, I think they're in big trouble down the other way, because I think the one downside with the Blues, and I've always been critical of them, is their back six is not the best. So yeah, if Wiedering has an average day at the office, they're almost a gone ski, in my opinion. But hopefully you enjoyed our review of the first week of finals, and hopefully in this regards, if you are in the elimination finals, hopefully you've got health insurance by the end of the game, and you don't go too downhill if your team does lose. If it is, so be it. Enjoy the early holiday. If you do win, hopefully you might be able to book early flight tickets to your potential destination come the semi-finals week. And for dog supporters in particular, I have a feeling 2016 could be on repeat come 2024, come this final series. So hopefully you enjoyed our kind of in-depth preview of the week one of final series. We'll be back for week two of the final series next week to share all our kind of reactions to the week one of finals. Nathan's Dags will be back, of course, and he'll be bringing through the stats that matter for week two of finals. But until then, enjoy the first week of finals, and we'll catch you for week two.